Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Your Absolute Mind. I'm your host Paula Sweet, and today's episode is another interview talking all things mental health. But this time we're talking mental health within the contingent temporary workforce. For today's interview, I had the pleasure of chatting with Colin Yoshioka-Smith after reaching out to him on LinkedIn. Now, Colin is the Director of RedWizard Consulting. He has over 20 years in the HR and people industry. As an active developer of managers and of recruitment, he's played an active role in managing and supporting individuals across businesses and showcasing the importance of mental health in the workforce. He's an ambassador of mental health first aid training and supporting people to take positive steps towards a healthy mind. So first up, before we go into our interview, I want to say a massive thank you to Colin for his time and his expertise that he put into this podcast. The insights and the honesty throughout our call is a great conversation that we had, and so many areas are covered relating to not only the contingent worker mental health, but also mental health overall for everyone. So before we go into our conversation that we had, here's some of the key points and the takeaways from our conversation in our chat. So in this podcast, we're going to cover the importance of recognising the difference between contingent temporary workforce and contracted workers and the different concerns that they have within the mental health workplace. We also discussed some of the steps a contingent worker might have to take to look after their mental health that maybe a contractual worker might not have to think about. Colin also highlights how the contingent worker can face added stress with not having that job security due to being temporary, which brings along mental health concerns in itself. We also discuss the importance of looking after our own mental health to enable us to feel more equipped to deal with the stresses of everyday life, which is what this podcast is all about, right? Colin also kindly shared some of his tips that he uses not only with employees, but also for himself to gain control over those difficult situations and thought processes. Now, I really enjoyed this chat with Colin, and I hope you enjoy this podcast too. So let's get to it. Now, before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk about something crucial: mental health in the workplace, which is why we're doing this podcast. How are you managing it? Look, we all know that a healthier, happier team is more productive and engaged. If you're a business leader or professional looking to enhance your team's well-being, I might just have the solution for you. As most of you know, I've been a therapist for over a decade, helping people with mental health issues from anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, PTSD, and so much more. And I know more than most how debilitating these issues can be. And I also know accessing a great therapist is like finding a needle in a haystack. This is why I've created Your Absolute Mind app, a simple, enjoyable, easy to use mental health app with a difference. I'm bringing powerful tools from therapy into the hands of your team in an enjoyable way. So if you want to see how the Absolute Mind app might be able to transform your workplace, head on over to absolutemind.app/contact and fill out the contact form. Let's book a call and discuss what the challenges facing your business and if we might be a good fit. There's no charge for the consultation, and together we can determine if our program is the right fit for your team. So don't wait. Visit absolutemind.app/contact today and take the first step towards a healthier, more productive workplace. So if you don't mind for me, Colin, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional background, and let the listeners know who we're talking to today.
Great. So I'm Colin Yoshioka-Smith. I head up contingent workforce program for a big, large construction company. I'm also a founder of a consultancy called RedWizard Consulting, where we support large businesses, typically global businesses, because the need they have for large contingent programs. So a contingent program is any business that hires temps or contractors, so your non-employee labour.
Fab. And that actually was going to be a question that I asked for listeners who aren't familiar with the term of contingent workers. So I think you just answered that one, which is absolutely brilliant.
It's a typical Americanism, I'm afraid. Something that gets thrown around, Americanisms, isn't it? So, we like the word temps in the UK. It's something about our lovely English language. Yeah, so temps is the word we often use. Yeah.
But we'll stick with the Americanism, the contingent side. That sounds a bit better than temp workers, doesn't it?
I know. I hate the word non-employee labour. That's another quite ugly term to me openly. So I have a HR background by trade, effectively. So, having a world of dealing with people and employees, when you say non-employee, it really is quite derogatory almost, because it's like, you shouldn't treat them any different really. At the end of the day, they just a contract that just doesn't work in the business long term. That's the only difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if, what inspired you to kind of discuss the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is mental health and the contingent, and I'll say temporary workforce. What was it that inspired you to want to talk about that on today's podcast?
Well, two things actually. So I'm a mental health first aider. I've been talking about mental health for quite a long time. Transparently, mental health was eye-opening as a course for me to be involved in, the first aid course. That was probably, trying to think back, probably nearly 10 years ago. And it was barely a thing now. I know it's become very more popular, and mental health's become a lot more open a conversation to have, which is really good, right? Particularly, I'm the stereotype of the kind of person that shouldn't talk about mental health, because I'm a middle-aged man that normally statistically would be less likely to sort of engage in a topic like this. But when we did the mental health first aid course, and I'll try and dig up the name in a moment and see if I can bring it up, because I would recommend, he still has his own company that trains this mental health first aid out. But the one thing that really shocked me and surprised me was how people manage mental health medication that's around, and if people have like serious conditions and challenges around like both bipolar disorder and stuff like that. I personally found that journey of, I suppose, self-discovery of where that spectrum is and the challenges around it, and that we don't just lock people up, bandage them and chuck them in a padded cell, the sort of misconceptions that are thrown in typically films and media of particularly of the sort of 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah.
That sort of finally being thrown away as a horrible misconception that we shouldn't, perhaps that was a treatment of the 70s, maybe they did, but certainly not how we would treat people today. And it was eye-opening. So that was one thing from general mental health. But why contingent workforce? Well, openly, I think there's a massive need, and I digress a little bit, but there's a massive need to get HR departments and businesses engaged compliantly, but hopefully into the world of what's known as total talent. So you can look at your workforce from both a people perspective and how you look after your employees and all that good stuff that HR are very good at, HR are no good at openly, the contingent workforce or temporary workforce. And they're kind of, dare I say, almost second-class citizens in some respects, some industries, right? So I definitely want to openly talk about the challenges that people face in that space, because it does have it has benefits actually. So it swings and roundabouts, but there is some differences and nuances that people face in temporary workforce that's certainly worth talking about.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me on to my first question. What are some of the unique challenges that you've seen that these short contracts, the contingent workers do face regarding mental health within that workplace? What's some of the challenges that you've seen?
Well, if I talk about the opposing between permanent employees and temporary workforce, because there are swings and roundabouts of different challenges, right?
Yeah.
Naturally, someone on a permanent gig, someone that's a permanent employee doesn't face the same challenges somebody that's temporary does. Naturally, the anxiety of not knowing where your next gig is coming from, how secure the gig you're in will be, how long that's going to be, that does have an impact mentally on people's performance. And also, there are certain industries that openly, and they shouldn't do this, but they thrive on creating almost a fear culture of, well, we can sack them tomorrow and get somebody else in, which is not really great, right? If you are a contingent workforce and you are a worker and you're working in an environment where you fear work, that is something that should be openly talked about, right? But because it is the nature of a business can benefit from a contingent worker, and the same way a contingent worker can benefit from that arrangement. Actually, not everybody wants to work in that way openly, but it does have that sort of mental health knock-on effect on both sides of it. From the employee side, though, what they can feel is often trapped. So the benefit of why some people want to go to contingent workforce is actually they don't feel like they're getting the development or the opportunities they would do if they went from what we call the gig culture, right? Going from one project to another. So on the flip side, employees do feel stifled that they can't progress or get involved in different things, or it's just a bit mundane. So it's quite interesting when you go into mental health of employment of any capacity, how the nuances are quite different. It's quite interesting to see behaviours that actually come out of it, actually, as a byproduct. Often managers perform these behaviours, but they don't understand the sort of root causes of them quite transparently.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you got any personal experiences or any kind of observations where you've witnessed the challenges firsthand? I know you mentioned your mental health first aider, so you will have seen things, you will have been in those positions to notice that difference, either personally or you know of somebody that's struggled and possibly is still struggling through these differences.
Well, so ex-HR manager and director, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen various case studies of mental health, and I will always openly and transparently try and support someone through a problem. Or I don't call them problems, I call them challenges, because openly, well, I'm sure the listeners and everyone can understand. But I'll give you some examples. I have had cases where people generally struggle with their mental health, with job security, particularly when people are on probation. It's actually an interesting time. And this happened several times, where you'll get someone who's quite new to a job. Let's say they're unwell during that early period, and suddenly they're on the back foot, which is horrible anyway, because there's a lot of stress when someone starts a new role. But the fact that someone's almost fallen behind the curve of where they should be in that position, that there's a huge amount of anxiety that kicks in. In fact, you can have people that struggle with like panic attacks and various other things. So they don't want to make any physical mistake at all in what their job opportunity is. And that's quite painful to see, because actually it can create someone to be self-destructive. It's a really weird thing to see someone not understand that. Just relax, look, mistakes happen, don't worry too much about it, just do your best, keep moving forward. But actually they cannot mentally themselves take themselves out of that rut that they've been created for themselves. The only solution to it is an outcome, and that's really painful to witness. You're standing there quite helpless, looking at someone going, well, it's going to go one way or the other of two extremes, because you've created that for yourself. The only thing I can recommend, and if any listener is in that scenario, is to really stop, self-reflect, and think about, what can I control? Because this is often, and this goes back to actually, this applies to a few different situations, but about control. It is one of the causes of mental health, anxieties and stuff that I've noticed over the years, is when people can't control something, or they feel they don't have control, what they do is they create this challenge for themselves that because it's beyond them almost, that it's too much. And so their anxiety levels go up, their stress will go up, they'll send themselves into a horrible spiral that actually, if you just reflect on, what can I control? Let me just focus on what I can control, rather than worrying about whether a train turns up on time. Well, you can control getting the earlier train that will ensure that you get there. It's a painful process maybe to do temporarily, but that is something you can control. You can certainly control the communication of, trains got cancelled, there's a problem. So there are things that you can control, and control can stabilize your mental well-being. And it's a quite powerful tool to self-reflect on. A lot of people don't think about how that level of control is actually quite powerful for yourself.
Yep.
If you have a bad manager, a bad business, whoever that will reprimand the control that you've done yourself and still punish you for it, then probably you're better off for your well-being not being anywhere near that business anyway. It probably worked out for the best, that you move on from it. And that sadly, there is a world of nice businesses and not so nice businesses, and nice managers and terrible managers. That's life, I'm afraid. We'll always try and develop better managers, but that's just nature that we'll have to go through eventually. But that's the most important thing I can stress to anyone is, take back control in any difficult situation as much as you can. You can always hang your hat and say, well, I took it upon me to do these things, put these in place, took control of what I can control. Everything else is beyond me. No one could really punish you outside of that. And that's quite empowering for yourself to be confident enough and reflective enough to do that. It's the biggest advice I could give anyone in those kind of unique circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's something, I'm sat here, obviously you can't see me, but I'm nodding away. I'm nodding away. I'm smiling. The whole taking back control. It's something that I don't think enough people realise just how much elements of control they can have. And it becomes almost like the scramble, isn't it? When someone's in that panic, when someone's in that anxiety, that fearful state, everything feels out of control. But in therapy sessions, I teach people the whole notion of control the things that you can. What can you control about this situation? You can't change. Unfortunately, we can't change the way your manager is, the boss, or the culture within the workplace. That's too big of a task for us to try and change at the moment. But in your scenario situation, what can you do? What can you grasp and go, right, okay, I've got that element of control now, and then get the next thing and the next thing. And it transforms their ability to rein it in, to help themselves, to reduce the panic, the anxiety, and stop the overthinking as much. But yeah, control the controllables is my phrase, and I absolutely love it. And try and teach all the clients that come in and sit with me that how important that part is, because there is parts of life that are out of control that we can't do anything about.
Absolutely. And if I go back to the contingent worker side of it, where, they don't know where their next gig is, are they in an ambiguous situation? Are they sure about the business that they're in or the manager they're working with? And even more concerning, because they could, at the drop of a hat, lose the opportunity, right, with very little notice. It's the nature of contingent workforce, right? Mm-hmm. And again, only worry about what you can control. But I think it's also, there's two things to add to this without making this topic on this one particularly long, but a couple of really, I suppose, acute things from my perspective, which is, number one, not being frightened to walk away from something with your head held high, to not care about whether... not that you don't care that financial impacts, don't get me wrong, everyone needs money, they've got bills to pay, but to walk away with your morals, that that your values are more important than something else, right? That's one thing people should really be passionate about and really go for. Doesn't matter if you're a contingent worker or an employee, for people with the same values, right? I think that's really important in life, right? To have, because actually people with the same values will always gravitate with people with the same values, right? Actually, and by default, circle of trust is something that then kicks in, and that's how actually teams do really well, regardless of the relationship of contractor versus employee, right? A circle of trust and value, shared value, is really important to move forward and stuff, particularly in innovation. There's lots of change and innovation needed in today's day and age, so that's how that's going to help all of that. But the only other tip, and something I've personally done in more recent years, and it's taken me a lot longer to do this transparently, because I've always been the coach or the supporter or the HR manager or the director for someone, or whatever it happens to be as a business owner. You end up in that situation where you're always supporting somebody else. And I took on a coach called Miles. Again, I'll see if I can track his full name for people. If people want to reach out to people, I'd always recommend good people. But he's been great. I've been with him for the last 6 months. And just to have someone to even tell you, what you already know. Sometimes you need to hear somebody else's voice tell you what you should know, what you should be doing best yourself. And it comes back to that. Sometimes you just need to vent and get those understandings of things. Even the best people in the world need coaching, need mentoring, need support. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the biggest thing that I struggle with is openly staying motivated with such a busy schedule. Right. I've got a busy project. I've got a busy business, 2 children. We talked about it before the call. Summer holidays kicking in. I've got a busy lifestyle, family, 2 sides of the world, family in Japan, family here, hence my weird surname, I always say to people. But the reality is, wife's Japanese for context for everybody, and mixed race children. But it's the ability to have someone to kind of go, I know I should be doing this. Why am I not doing this right?
Yeah.
Or actually, I thought this. What do you think? It's really nice to have that kind of forum, and hopefully, people that work with you or get to speak to you. It's quite important to kind of get that off your chest. Is probably the best way of putting it. Sometimes those anxieties go away with just talking to someone. Actually, you don't even need to pay for somebody. Some people are in trickier situations where they probably haven't got someone to talk to, but transparently, I think it's the most healthiest thing anybody can do. Doesn't matter how competent, experienced, expert you are. I always think it's great to talk. I think that's the best advice I could ever give anybody in whatever situation you're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as well, like you said, even if you don't have the ability to talk to people freely, or you don't have access to therapists, you can't afford it, it'd be one of those things. But even just the ability sometimes to, some of the clients that I get them to sometimes journal. And then sometimes also use tools like alternate perspectives and trying to see things from a whole other angle, rather than seeing it just as a one instance that has this absolute, this is the dead set response that I need to give it. If you can try and reflect and try to do some self-introspection and ask yourself the right kind of questions, you can come to resolutions by yourself without other people if you don't have that access to them. But I think it's learning those tools and understanding how to do different perspectives, how to put yourself into, like I use it as an example I use in therapy is it's like the 3 hat method. So imagine there's a situation, you're the first person, you're in that situation, you know what you feel, you're feeling it, it's raw. Then go and put somebody else's hat on, put an outsider's hat on. What might they think about this situation? What might they have as a bit of advice? And then the third hat is if you're in a situation with somebody else and say they've upset you or something's bothering you, or put their hat on and what might they be thinking, what might they be feeling, what might explain the way that they've responded to you. Sometimes just having that ability to be able to do that for ourselves it can transform how we deal with difficult situations, how we deal with anxiety, panic, overthinking. Having that ability to use that tool can be transformational for people.
Absolutely. And in today's day and age, even we go back to journaling as an example, that was something recommended to me not that long ago. It's really good for supporting. I mean, this is a typical problem with people that are in busy jobs and busy lives and stuff, is burnout, right? Journal's really good for reflecting, because if you reflect and you understand what you've achieved, you will feel more satisfied to move on and keep plowing on in that scenario. That's that self-reflection, as you say, is really important. But I think the beauty of technology now, like I'm one of these people that are happy to read something factual, I'm happy to type something up and do something. But when it comes to reading stories openly, I'm not going to pick up the Harry Potter or the latest novel. That doesn't really float my boat. I'm more of I want to absorb it in different ways. So I'm quite kinesthetic, as in I like to learn from doing things and all the rest of it. And the point I'm trying to make is the good thing about technology today is I could record my voice and transcript that. You could video yourself. You could journal in lots of different ways that actually could be a good way of getting that out. If you're not happy sitting there, people think journal, they think, I'm going to sit there with a pen and paper and write something, right? That's kind of the interpretation that gives. But there's different ways in which you could really reflect that. The only thing I would certainly say, and again, I'll give you a real life example of me. The one thing I reflected in the last, going back to my coach session recently, actually, it only happened a couple of weeks ago. So I was chatting to him and I was like, I need to make sure I'm not burning out, that I'm looking after myself. There's certain things that I do, but I can always do more. And I said, the one thing I should do is more exercise. And he was like, well, have you done anything about it? And I was like, well, someone reached me about personal coach, but, trying to fit it in. And I sat there and I'm like, I'm making excuses, clearly. And I walked off that call. And the first thing I did was I inquired about the local gym. I got a trial go day on Sunday this weekend. I've already said that I'll sign up to it.
Fab.
I know that actually a lot of the things that I should do, it took a conversation with someone to tell me, why haven't you done that yet? Well, you're clearly putting that off. Why? And starting with a journal or anything, I think the biggest boundary for people is not doing anything. It's safer not to do something than it's to try something.
Yes.
So always just try something. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, try a better one.
Yep.
You know, you'll always find where your sweet spot is if you always push to find something that works better for you. It's just nature to procrastination is, we could talk about that as a subject, so it could be a long podcast, but procrastination is genuinely I was looking at this as a training session a few years ago. Actually, we were talking about time management training session in a HR setting. With the team at the time. And procrastination is a safety mechanism. We procrastinate if we fear something.
Yep.
And so lots of people in business just sit on stuff. And it's like, well, why haven't you done it yet? Well, clearly they fear, or they're not sure, or they're embarrassed to ask the question or something. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to procrastinate to the point that you're getting told off for it than it is just to get something done. And I clearly was procrastinating, not by a lot, but clearly I'd already self-reflected that exercise should be important to me. I'm at that age in my 40s now, sadly, or happily, depending on your viewpoint of where other people are. I'm typical middle-aged, and sadly I do need to look after myself. I don't look bad, but, a dog walk, on a weekly basis is not enough exercise to, be really healthy for old age. And I'm really mindful of that, but also that's another great way to, again, get your mind in a good place.
Yes.
Focus on something else, zone out, running. I'm not really a running fan. I'd rather lift some weights or do a class or get on the not rowing machine, cycling machine or something like that, right? I'd rather do something like that. But again, any of those things will mean I'm not thinking about work. Even for an hour is, again, a good detox. So people, it's good to kind of do something.
Absolutely.
Rather than nothing.
And again, it comes back down to that taking control, doesn't it? It's for me, physical exercise, there's so many, again, we could do a whole other podcast on it, but I talk about a lot in therapy sessions all over my social platforms of the mental health foundations. And, it comes down to your sleep, your nutrition, your hydration, your movements, your connection with people. There's so many things that we could actually do for ourselves that put us in a space where we can almost tackle anything. That doesn't mean that we won't ever feel anxiety, or we won't ever feel low moods or depression, or we won't struggle and experience burnout. But if we've got the foundations in place, then we're at a far better advantage to be able to deal with the things that cause burnout and cause anxiety. It's just it's that personal, it's that accountability, it's that self-discipline. Being able to put those into place puts us in that far better position to deal with life. That's my view on life and how we should tackle it. But yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
I definitely think I live by moderation. I always say I won't deny necessarily anything, but I won't overdo anything either. The one thing I self-reflected, and it comes back to how I identified exercise, was I'm quite lucky, if I digress. I actually I have a Japanese wife that cooks a very good Japanese diet. So I've got a very varied diet. I'll eat everything, right? A bit of a dustbin me anyway. So it worked out well marrying a Japanese woman, but some 18 years ago. But, the fact that we've got such a varied diet, I don't have energy level problems that some diets or restricted diets do cause that, right? So I was able to go sort of after the pandemic, so it's now been a couple of years of no gym, no regular exercise. I was very good during the pandemic, me actually, but the last couple of years I haven't been. I've been more sofa than gym, right? And what I would say is, although my energy levels haven't been too low, what I did self-identify, and this is something that's people have to be very careful of, is when you do become tired, what you do is you start to create habits. So the first habit that we typically have as a family, which is a terrible one, and we have to be really careful here, is we get to the after dinner, you sit on the sofa, you're watching TV, and then you start snacking.
Yes. Or
you start drinking. And what happens is you end up, and although we don't have too much chocolate and we don't drink too much alcohol, it's very easy for a regular situation to go, oh, well, it's my Tuesday night, so I can have a drink. And it's a Wednesday night, I can have a drink. It's Thursday, it's Friday, night. you end up in a situation where you're drinking a regular couple of glasses every night as a way to recharge or relax. And actually, they're very terrible self-serving, self-abuse almost to yourself and to your body. I don't say you should ever cut these things out. You should enjoy an occasional chocolate bar and a glass of wine, but maybe think about why you're enjoying that and what day of the week it is, rather than creating it as really stressed from work today, I'm going to have a bottle of wine to get over it. Actually, that's probably the worst thing you could do on reflection, right? But lots of people will do it because actually it's smoking as well, right? I'm an ex-smoker. Many years ago, I used to smoke more than 10 years ago. Most relaxing thing in the world was having a cigarette in the morning, after food, at night, with beer or whatever. And the only reason it was relaxing is because you're doing something and you're heavily breathing. And it's actually oxygen that allows the relaxation, right? It's not anything else. But actually, just by breathing in, taking time out, drinking something that's non-alcoholic as a replacement, that seems more like juice instead of alcohol as a replacement, would probably give you the same endorphins, same feelings that you're hoping for, without actually poisoning yourself effectively, right?
Absolutely.
There's lots of other replacements that you could do. It's just making compromises that are more sensible, so you're not creating habits that are terrible to get out of and break, right? Particularly if you do like a glass of wine, as I do. Wine and cheese man as a habit that's pretty ingrained in me. Couldn't sound more British if I tried at this point. It's one, if you do like it, means that you really got to be mindful of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can become almost sometimes those kind of habits wrapped up in the idea of self-care as well, of, I'm looking after myself, I'm going to sit on the couch, I'm going to have a chocolate bar and I'm going to binge watch Netflix, and in some cases those kind of habits have been wrapped up in the whole idea of that being a self-care process, whereas I try and flip that for a lot of people and go, actually that is self-abuse. It's fine to have those days where you do fancy a bit of chocolate, you do fancy a bit of wine, and that's okay, but if you wrap it up in the idea that this is self-care, that becomes a very, very quick downward spiral that creates horrid habits that then has the knock-on effect with your mental health. So I think that's a really, really important point for listeners to understand the idea of self-care and what that really means. And how they can implement real good self-care in the terms of meditation, breath work, go for regular exercise. It again comes back down to my foundations that I talk about in sessions with people. But on the terms of, let's look at kind of solutions, and in your eyes, practical solutions. So from your, the work that you've done, the visual that you've got of people and how they struggle within the workforce, what in your terms, your eyes, is practical steps that either employers can take or employees can take to create more of a supportive environment, or how they can take control? And let's put it in the context more of the contingent workers, rather than your full-time contractual workers. What's some of those steps that employers or employees could take that might help themselves?
Great questions and massive subject. There's probably a podcast in this on its own. There are some quick thing or headline stuff that I can start with. I think it always comes down to the starting point being a relationship that you have, the engagement that you have with your workforce and your manager, right? As a manager of a team, right, the most important thing is I speak to everyone every week, check in to make sure people are okay. And people have good week, bad week, good week, terrible week, amazing week, terrible week, good week. You are having to ride where someone sits are on that week, which when you are a manager, and I've done loads of management training, openly, managers are not trained very well, two, often are not the most people orientated, surprisingly, right? And so they also, as a manager, you will have ups and downs, and sadly stars don't always align of where your mood is versus the mood of someone else, right? You've got to kind of ride that wave maturely. To accept that there's going to be differences in where people are. But it's also the ability, and particularly from a mental health perspective as a manager, or if you've outsourced, you've got temporary workforce or a limited company in supporting or whatever, and you're managing that, yes, they are slightly detached if they're not an employee, so non-employee or contingent workers. But at the end of the day, from a duty of care and general being a nice human being, you should regularly speak to that person, individual, or business to understand where things are and actually to identify if there's any problems. Often things go wrong caused by something that we're not aware of. But if there is an ongoing open conversation around it, then you will capture it. And frankly, people will often come to you as a manager and go, look, we've always had this open relationship. Just to let you know, this has happened, to make you aware of it. Okay, thank you for giving me the heads up. Do you need time out? Do you need this? What can I do to help you, if at all? And then just keeping an eye on that situation. The biggest thing I would say is one thing to reflect as any manager is to identify when you start seeing someone going down a spiral that could lead to depression, right? So does someone's appearance change? They've stopped looking after themselves. Is a clear sign that someone's going towards a challenge in their life, right? That's the first thing. Actually, not to punish someone for it. You know, if someone turns up with an unironed shirt for 2 weeks and looks a bit sloppy and doesn't look like they've had a shower in a few days, at that point, you should work out, have you just been on a binge here and been on a stag do, or have you just let yourself go to that degree? That's a huge flag of you should be addressing that in a professional way of support rather than punishment, right? So they'll be the first things that are very much from the manager's side. When I think about the contingent worker and even an employee, to be fair, but certainly from a contingent worker where you are in a little bit of a consulting capacity almost with the business, the most important thing to ensure you're getting the best out of your, I suppose, client in this case, or business you're working with, and vice versa, to understand how they can give you occasional support, but not being uncompliant of. There is a bit of legality around contingent workers. You can't have dual working or misclassification of someone's relationship with a business. But I think you should have such a good relationship, an open relationship with that business. You speak to them if you are having a challenge or they're having a challenge, that you can mutually be there for each other in some capacity. And I think what it does is strengthen relationships, actually. And you can still enjoy the benefits of being a contingent worker, but it's just understanding people on a person-to-person level. I think what that does is, if there is a hard conversation of, really sorry, we're going to have to let you go as a manager because they've run out of funding or something like that, there's a conversation that can be had on a person-to-person level that's authentic and honest about what the challenges are. And actually, if you do end up in a situation where you are, all right, I'm without a gig, I'm looking for my next gig, at least you know there's an honest, hopeful reference that will come out of that, but a good relationship that you know you can always go back to that business if that situation changes. Relationships are so many dimensional, right? It's not one dimension as people think what contingent labour should be. It is multifaceted if you've got good relationships in that business. And if you don't, and feel like you don't get what you need out of that business or that person, you probably want to reflect whether that's a person or project for you openly. I don't care what capacity someone's in, I still treat people in the same way as I treat them if they weren't in that capacity, they were somewhere else, right? It's just my nature as a person, but I would certainly support anybody. Things happen, people have needs, right? It's just the way nature is. So that's the best advice. Obviously, employees can go to HR openly. Going to HR has its challenges. Sometimes that can be looked negative if you're an employee going to HR above a manager. But HR should be there to support. They often are. Often managers are not fully equipped, so sometimes HR fill the void or the gap of knowledge and expertise. One last thing is, a lot of businesses do have mental health first aiders now. Openly is another thing. So you do get that kind of benefit as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's obviously a new thing, isn't it? That's kind of coming up over the years, is the mental health first aiders. I don't think that's ever been a part of companies' lifestyle, the culture. It's never been there. And obviously there's more resources that are becoming accessible within workplaces. But when you look at the contingents side of things, the contingent worker, if in an example for yourself, if you had a contingent worker and you had mental health resources that were accessible to your employed contractual workers, is there a way of how organisations could make that accessible to a contingent worker? In the terms of like an EAP or mental health apps or whatever it be that companies have got available,
well,
is that possible?
Well, there is possibilities that you can still have the boundaries of where two different groups work and still offer support, right? Particularly if you've got contractors on site. I definitely think any mental health first aid should be available. When we start going into ERP plans and things like that, obviously that is a benefit to a permanent employee, that relationship. But I think contractors should think about their own. And this is the other thing that contractors kind of have a benefit of, right? There's tax benefits and cuts and everything else a limited company or a self-employed can adopt. They should really budget and think about having their well-being as a contractor looked after individually. I do think they forget about the benefits that come with those kind of things. So, and there's lots of schemes out there. Maybe not, I don't remember if Bupa do this, but certainly some of the other big organizations do offer pay-as-you-go models where you only pay if you use these kind of things. And so it doesn't even have to cost the small one-man band limited company that's got a couple of clients, right? They can have some sort of ERP scheme quite openly, right, to their disposal. It's just a case of people don't think of that. A lot of people think about their tax benefits rather than, the wider benefits that employment bring, right? That's the benefit of being self-employed and stuff like that, right? They see all the tax benefits, the tax cuts, the tax advantages, but actually this is the benefits of being an employee, right? Openly in business is they can access these kind of things. But again, from our well-being safety perspective, I think people being on site, I'm sure a site-by-site case would look at how they could support anybody in the building, and mental health being one of those. A bit like first aid, in a building if someone hurt themselves, I'm sure they would look after that person. It doesn't matter what capacity, a visitor or anything. I think mental health would apply in the same way nowadays, which is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have you got any success stories where you've seen somebody improve their mental health that has been a contractual worker that's taken on board maybe advice that you've given them, being the mental health first aider, being managerial role? Have you got any success stories where somebody's managed to transform their mental health or take control of certain aspects that they weren't quite feeling were in control?
So a couple of years ago, and this is quite a specific example, we worked with a charity that had a couple of people that came out of care. They also came out of a very not an affluent area of Southeast London, transparently. The kind of lifestyle they probably would have been brought up in is having, knives in pockets, and you can work out the pictures, right? In terms of what this sort of looks like. They were given an opportunity to go into an apprenticeship, and openly there was some real behavioural challenges on site. It was in construction. They were doing their apprenticeship, and there was some clear. You do get this amongst particularly younger males. I think this is an age thing as well, where they try and size each other up and happy to have an argument over stuff. But some of that was quite concerning. In most cases, normally they would see themselves unemployed again and going back to that sort of process. But we took the time to sort of really sit down and understand the situation and give them another chance. The last time I spoke to them, they were still in the industry and still trying to be successful in that. And it was really turning around people that had a mental situation and experience. They would try to come into the workplace and not, their situation was quite extreme, but I actually think a lot of young people do have these nuances when they go into the world of work for the first time actually as well. The unwritten rules that come in, but their mental state was one of defensiveness, and sadly in an environment that comes from violence quite often, let's be honest, you default into what you feel safe in, and oddly violence is what they felt safe in, and so it was to take them out of that rehabilitate them almost into the world of work, of understanding where people's values, standards should be, and things like that, and then watch them slowly with regular communication build up and become a lot more confident and move forward in their life, and they were able to achieve that. But that's a long slog, and not everyone gets those opportunities, sadly, right? Some people do fall back to the cracks of falling back into old habits, and they never really move forward from that. But it was nice to see, it was 3 people that managed to move forward out of that situation into success. And, there was a lot of dedication at that point. We were coming out of COVID back then still. And we saw that success come out of it. Other successes are going back to people with probations. They've seen better outcomes, luckily come from a situation, reflecting on it a little bit more. But again, you see situations sometimes work and sometimes not work. Yeah. Sometimes it's about a person, and I can only do so much. Transparently, this is where people have to take control for themselves. Yeah. The support can be out there, but sometimes people need to look after themselves and get the support to ensure it's a success. It takes a kind of a joint effort sometimes.
Absolutely.
In these situations. I think everyone hopes there's a magic wand for someone that's going to get them out of it. And I think it's like, no, you have to take responsibility for yourself and actually ask as well. Don't be frightened to ask for support. And I think people will support you, actually asking your manager, asking family. People are frightened to ask, particularly openly, and I'm not being sexist here, on the male side. Terrible at asking.
Absolutely.
I've got a teenager that doesn't ask for anything, and it's like you can see the behavior traits already, and it's like hormones, and that's his age, don't get me wrong, but I can see those traits carrying on and lingering when he's 18, 20. There'll be I always say I didn't grow up until I was 24 openly, and probably 30 properly. I think that's how males grow up, by the way. I think women grow up at about 21, move forward at a much younger rate than males do. But that's just the nature of, sadly, the differences of sexes and maturity. But mental health does play into maturity and the ability to just say, could I be better? Could I ask? Can I get help? Could I help myself? Quite transparently.
Absolutely. Well, do you know, Colin, I feel like I could talk to you forever because we seem to be on the same wavelength. We seem to be on the same brain waves.
It's a big subject.
So maybe you'll have to come back on another podcast where we can talk about a whole load more of mental health and self-help and all that kind of stuff. But before I do end this call and the podcast, just some closing questions, really. What for our listeners, what's one key message that maybe you'd like to share that our listeners can take away regarding mental health support, particularly for short contract workers or for anybody really? What's one key message that you'd like them to take away from today?
I'm only allowed one. Do you know what? And it sounds a bit of a cliche if I say it like this. I would always say, and I had a very hard upbringing when I was younger. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. There's about 5 podcasts in that alone. But I would say it doesn't matter how hard a situation anyone's in, there is always a better way out of it. And take a small, we call it Kaizen, which is like small and regular concept, but it's literally that. Take small steps forward every day or every week, as much as your energy can offer, and you will see the benefits, and you will create happiness for yourself effectively. And drink, drugs and everything else actually will never make you happy. It's temporary. It's never long-lasting happiness. Long-lasting happiness comes from within. And, it took me a good long time of my life before I achieved what I would deem as I'm happy now. But it doesn't mean that I don't work every day to keep sane, to keep energized, to keep healthy. It's an ongoing. Mental health is a muscle that you have to exercise, and you're only as fit as the gym that you go to and actually do, right? And the same with your mental health, of exercising it and, doing hobbies, making sure that you're doing something that's stimulating, as in play around a golf, go and do bowling, go and walk around parks and go and adventure out and do dog walks, or whatever you're particularly into. And it doesn't matter what it is, make sure that you're doing that weekly, because that's going to keep you on a healthy mind. And that's the only one tip I would say.
Absolutely.
It's really important.
I actually feel like you've been listening in on some of my sessions with clients. You sure you've not put a camera in my therapy room? You're pretty much just saying everything that comes out of my mouth in my sessions. So it feels like you've been watching me, Colin.
I've been spying. No, I haven't. I promise. But no, it's been great to talk. And like I say, they're all honest things that I think all good people like yourself will want people to do, right?
Yeah.
I think it's, without quoting songs and bursting into song here, can only get better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the mentality, right?
Absolutely.
But like I say, everyone works hard every day for it. So it doesn't come easy, but it's certainly doable.
No, it absolutely does. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Likewise.
And like I said, I'd love to have you back on for some more. So maybe we can discuss that and try and get it into our busy schedules in between kids, summer holidays and workload. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
Likewise.
Now, as we wrap up this episode, I again want to offer my sincere appreciation to Colin for his time, and I want to leave you with a message of empathy and empowerment. We've explored various ways in which we can all gain control over our mental health, and how even when things do become difficult, even the smallest of steps each day can build strong mental health foundations. Whether you're a contingent worker or a contractual worker, you have the ability to create better mental health habits that will aid you in every step of life. I really enjoyed my chat with Colin, and I think he might be back on for another episode soon. I hope you enjoyed today's episode too. Until next time, take care.